So good morning, Wellspring family and friends, those of you here in person and those of you online. I just want to name before we look into Philippians chapter 2 this morning that I know that all of us walked in today carrying probably more than what we can quickly name. You might have arrived this morning kind of feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders, or perhaps carrying that anxiety in your bodies. We know that another war began what felt like overnight this week, and although it's in some quarters of the world it brings feelings of hope, maybe especially those longing for freedom after generations of violence, but also brings deep worry and concern for others, including concern for those who may be impacted, whether they be civilians or whether they even be folks in our own military armed forces who may be directly impacted. So I know we're carrying that, and we're carrying so much more, right? As a society, we've been grappling with millions of pages of files released just depicting absolute horrors that we can't even begin to wrap our minds around. And I don't know about you, but I carry the weight of wondering whether or not the perpetrators and those with immense wealth and power will ever be held accountable. All around us, we see people that Jesus identifies with: the hungry, the stranger, the poor, the sick, the imprisoned, as Jesus says in Matthew 25. We can see how society tilts away from them and towards folks at the top, who are favored, who we make excuses for, who are rewarded. I think we carry weight of the world with us, and we also carry our own inner weight, things going on in our families, concerns, hopes, disappointments, fears. Perhaps you're even carrying some of the weight of confusion or grief. Maybe what you see unfolding doesn't quite match what you hoped or imagined for. So with all of this in mind, when we look at today's text, which is all about Christian community, specifically like the shape of Christian living together, I don't know about you, but you might wonder, I know I wondered as I was first thinking about this, why are we talking about the community of God, the people and how we are together? Why are we talking about that right now? Are we just burying our head in the sand while things burn around us? And what I was reminded of, and what I would like to invite to remind you of as well, is that people live and people die in community. Community can gather us into ways of being that are good, that restore, that heal, that sustain, that help us get through, even if it's not perfect. Community can also really reinforce ways of thinking and being that lead to isolation and destruction and even death. So how we are together really matters for all the big things too. It matters to our physical and our mental health. It matters to the kind of capacity we bring to our neighbors, to our family, to our shared life. It matters when how we pursue love and how we pursue peace, how we seek accountability, what doors we're able to open and close. All of that is related to how we live together. Right? Community matters because of the shape of who we are, how we show up for each other or not, how we listen, how we share the hard things with each other, how we practice mercy, how we invite each other to experience God. They all say something really powerful about who we believe God is. How we are together as the community of faith really shows rather than tells the good news. And that's perhaps right where we enter today's passage, today's text in Philippians 2. Because sometimes the only way to reveal what something is, right? Because sometimes what something looks like is not what it really is. Sometimes the only way to really see what it is to open it up to the light, maybe to cut into it. And that's where a very silly TV show comes in. I think I have a slide of this on the screen. A few months ago, I was trying to find a lighthearted TV show to start watching with my youngest child and just to unwind with in the evening. And we came across a TV show called Is It Cake? This one right here. And let me tell you, I like the idea of the show way more than the actual show. It's great if you like it, that's great. I really like the idea of it. I was like, wait a minute. The very intriguing premise, just in case you haven't watched it or seen it, is basically that contestants have to choose between, it's usually two options in front of them on a plate. And one of the options is cake, and the other one is definitely not cake. So you might have like two old boots, like both on a plate, and one of them is an actual like leather beat up boot, and the other one is cake, just expertly frosted and decorated and shaped to look like an old leather boot. Maybe there's two raw, juicy steaks, right? Like it's shiny, it looks like all juicy, and it's all marbled, it's shaped on the plate, and you actually have to cut into it to figure out, like, is it a steak or is it cake? And the contestants on this show, sometimes they guess right, because you have to guess, right? And I have to say, it sometimes was challenging, even for me, when I watched this once, to kind of figure out what it was, like, until they cut into it. And then they find out. Because sometimes the shape of something doesn't match what it really is. Sometimes the shape of something doesn't actually match what it claims to be. And I have to say, oh, here we go. This is a burger. Burger cake, a cake. It's not a burger, it's a cake. So sometimes the shape of something doesn't match what it claims to be. And I feel like our passage today that we're looking at in Philippians chapter 2, in Paul's letter to the early Christian church in Philippi, I feel like they could have been a contestant on this show. Is it cake? And although our main passage for today begins in chapter 2, we're going to backtrack a bit right to where Pastor Cheryl closed her sermon last week, back to chapter 1, verse 27, as Paul sets up a big exhortative sentence. It's basically a big call, encouraging call, and he sets the sentence up, and then he spends chapter 2 talking about it. And so we're going to go ahead, and I'll read that first, and then I'm going to give us a little context. It says, "Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ." Now, just to remind you, Paul is currently in prison as he's writing these words, and he's actually talking about the uncertainty, not really know what's going to happen to him, right? He might be freed, he might lose his life, he's not really sure. He's in custody of the Roman Empire because he's been imprisoned for being a threat to the Roman Empire in sharing the good news of Jesus. Because the good news of Jesus was in strong contrast to the empire, which demanded its own allegiance, its own worship, its own way of hierarchy and way of viewing the world. And the good news of Jesus was really threatening to their way of being and to their power. So he's in prison. And the letter he's writing is basically like a long thank you note to the church in Philippi, because the church in Philippi, once they heard that he was in prison, they actually sent one of their members over with a large and substantial gift for him. Because the way it was in that day is if you were imprisoned, you were not supplied with any food. And instead, you would have to use up what little savings you had, or your friends would have to supply your needs, or else you would starve. You relied on the generosity of others. And as Pastor Cheryl opened our series last week, we were sitting with Paul in prison and watching him name his limits and lean low in humility and trust God in the middle of an unfinished story. And last week, Pastor Cheryl helped us open the door to living Christ, open this door inward to living Christ, naming our limits without shame, somehow trusting that God is in our process. And today we see Paul opening the door outward, encouraging this church in this thank you letter he's writing to a way of living together that is good news, a way of living together that bears witness to the gospel. When you cut into it, is it gospel? And let's read that verse again, 127. That's the context of where he brings this sentence, but then we're going to look at how he parses that out in chapter 2. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. That's chapter 1, verse 27. Now, as we look at this, I don't know about you, but when I see the word conduct, I think of like behavior. I think maybe it's saying like behave nicely, or make sure you measure up to all the good things God has done. And the one tricky thing in this passage is that when we read it, that word for conduct in the Greek doesn't quite capture at all what Paul's first hearers of this book, when they heard it read aloud, they would have heard a totally different word. And they would have understood something that maybe it's hard for us to understand without looking at that Greek word. And the Greek word used here for conduct is the word polituomai. Polituomai. And it literally means live as citizens. It's a civic word. Live as citizens. And the word that he uses when he tells them to conduct yourselves, live as citizens, you together, is a plural word. So he's not saying each of you in your private, individual, spiritual lives live as citizens of God. No, he's talking about y'all all together, like who you are in your community to each other. He's speaking to each one of us, you, me, and us, all of us who share a common identity in Jesus and here in our community. He's not even talking about the Roman identity. So when he uses the word citizens there, I thought, wow, he's being really kind of feisty word for him to use here. He's kind of giving main character energy because remember, he's currently imprisoned by Rome. Chances are he has a Roman officer right next to him as he writes this letter or as he, dictates it for someone else to write. And here he is being seen as a possible threat to the empire, and he's using this word that means citizens, politeuomai, not to talk about the Roman Empire, but to refer to their shared identity in Christ. He's not telling them, hey, y'all, live as Roman citizens. But he's saying, live as a people whose counter-imperial allegiance is to the good news of Messiah. He's writing to people here in Philippi, and only maybe 30 or 40% of those folks would have been Roman citizens. It was very expensive and costly to purchase a citizenship. Not many folks were born as citizens. And so in the area where this church was, most people were not citizens, and it would have been an encouraging thing to hear that although they might not be citizens of this empire, which gave them some privileges and also had some really big shortcomings, they were citizens of a different identity. And that's what they were invited to live into, that identity together, whose counter allegiance is to Messiah, Christ. So here he is. He's exhorting this church. He's strongly encouraging them. Live as a people whose shared life looks like it belongs to Jesus, not empire. When you cut into the fabric of our community or cut into the cake of our community, is it gospel? Is it our shared citizenship in Jesus? Now, as we mentioned before, sometimes the shape of something doesn't really match what it really is. I remember vividly when someone in my family, who will remain unnamed, and they were taking their dish to the kitchen after dinner, and they absentmindedly picked up what looked like a small piece of ground beef that had dropped from their plate to the floor, and they absentmindedly picked it up and put it in their mouth. Now, please bear in mind that our cat's food dish is on the way to the kitchen. It's kind of on the side right there. And I think you might know what happened. What they put in their mouth was food, but it was not ground beef. And yes, I know that's a gross story. But sometimes, right, what something looks like doesn't match what it really is. And sometimes a community might claim gospel identity, and it sure looks like it. When you cut into it, when pressure comes, what's inside tells a different story. Looks like cake, but isn't cake. Looks like good news, but isn't good news. So here in this encouraging call, Paul says, live as citizens of God's kingdom, whose togetherness, whose shared life is good news. And then in chapter 2, he starts cutting the cake. What's inside? What is the shape of this good news? What does it look like? So let's go ahead to Philippians 2, 1 through 4, and I have it on a slide here. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, I grew up hearing this passage a lot in the stream of the faith I was in. I actually remember memorizing it in school, but we only memorized the second part of it in verse 3. And that part says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others as above yourselves. Now, if this is an exhortation to community life, if it has a shape at all, I would say this shape looks like a line pointing in one direction, right? It starts at one point and it kind of extends forever in one direction, kind of like a ray, or maybe like a one-way street of love. So I have like a little shape here, right? First of all, value others above yourselves. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Don't look to your own interests, each of you to the interests of others. And the way I heard it taught when I was growing up was that it's never about you, and don't let it be about you. Make yourself really small as you lift others up. And I don't know whether that was just what we heard when the girls were separated from the guys in youth group. But what we heard was like, keep serving, keep giving, keep pouring out. And it always seemed as though those with like maybe a little bit more influence in the church or maybe different roles, they would teach that to people with that maybe were like structurally in a different place than them. Like I never heard a ministry team leader quoting this to a leader. I never once heard a church secretary quoting this passage to the pastor. I didn't hear that. So I saw this one direction line, right? It starts from you and it goes endlessly forward. I feel like this is a description of draining love. That would be number one in your notes. The shape, possible different shapes of community that we see. The first one we see is a distortion, a one-way line, and that's draining love. Keep lifting others up, and after a lifetime of doing this, or even a few years, you're drained, you burn out. At worst, it can lead to self-erasure. And none of those things are Jesus Messiah's good news. So out of the three shapes of the communal good news living we see in our text today, this is the distortion. And the reason why this distortion is, well, we can clearly see it's a distortion, and it's because it's based off of a mistranslation in this verse that needs to be corrected. So we're going to go ahead and correct that mistranslation now so we can see a better shape. Okay, now I've taken these Greek grammar slides. I have to say Pastor Cheryl is going to recognize them because I took them directly from a message that she and I heard at Midwinter when we went a couple last month to Chicago for our annual clergy conference with other pastors in our denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church. And the gentleman who spoke, he is a New Testament professor. I actually think he was your New Testament professor at your seminary. Yes, okay, that's great. So he's a New Testament scholar. He teaches at North Park Seminary, and I actually got to meet him the week before he spoke, and he was talking about how he just finished writing a commentary on Philippians, and I'm like, hey, is it published? Can we have it? We're literally in Philippians when we get back. So I took these directly from his slides. So here we go. Pastor Schuller recognized them. His name is Max Lee. He describes the mistranslation we're going to look at as the difference between life and death. Let's look at verse 3. This is part of Paul's exhortation. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value. Well, let's go all the way back. Oop, now you're seeing all the cool stuff. Okay. Oh, no, I think we're all out of order. Is there one that has... There you go. Davey found it. Thank you, Davey. This is the one. Okay, close your eyes, open them. Pretend the slide is what you saw originally. Okay, verse 3. This is in the NIV. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value others as above yourself. This is the mistranslation. This is the one direction line, right? Others. When in fact, that word is a totally different one in the Greek. We can go to the Greek one now, Davey. That word is actually one another. In the Greek, it is the word allelous. And I just think of saying allelu when I see it. Allelu, but it's allelous. Allelous is part of the word that is used for one another in the Greek. And it's used a total of 100 times in the New Testament. It has different forms of it depending how it's used in the sentence, but it's one word. This is in the accusative form, allelous, which means it's used as a direct object. So it'd be like, honor one another, share with one another, love one another, eat cake with one another, right? It's used in the direct object form. And so this right here is actually the word there. You would never know it because it's translated as others in almost every single English translation I can find. Now, a couple things about this before we get some meaning out of it. we have some other grammatical notes. Basically, it's always used in plural form. So it's not like one another as in just like one of you. But because it's used in plural form, Maxley says it is reflexive, which means built into the meaning of this is reciprocity. Reciprocity is literally built into its lexical meaning. Whenever this pronoun occurs, allelus, it means together, all together, you and me, one another. So it's a different picture, right? A different kind of pattern. We're looking at a different shape. So let's just pause for a second and ask, like, what kind of difference do you think it makes in the text between the word others as opposed to one another? Just for you. Why do you think it matters? Yes, yes, yes. One other means each other, which means it includes you. Yes, where others doesn't include you. It's just others. But one another means that you are included in this shape. It is not a one-directional line. This really does matter. So this is in verse 3. If you go to verse 4, there's another thing. It's maybe less of a mistranslation, and sometimes it's a mistranslation when it talks about each of you looking to the interest of others. Sometimes you'll see in some English translations, it will say, not merely looking to your own interests, but also to the interest of others. And that's a little more correct. Some translations will just say, not looking to your own interests, but the interest of others. And they're kind of like maybe shortchanging the full meaning of that. So basically how we translate this verse, whether it's others and then only their interests, or whether it's one another and not merely looking to your own interests, it is a different shape. And I have to say the shape that I see here is the shape not of a one-directional line, not the shape of draining love, but in reciprocity, I see the shape of a circle. Right, as each one of us looks to each other and lifts each other up, and then I lift you up and you lift me up and we lift them up and they lift each other up, and suddenly we are all included in this. There's giving and receiving. It's a different shape. If we were to zoom out and look at the whole passage for today, right, it's not just verse 3, we'll see that it in fact affirms this shape of a circle. Let's go ahead and look up Philippians 2, the other slide we have from him. It says the flow of Philippians, if you're able to find that, Davey. And he goes on, because I got these slides from Maxley, so he goes on all the way through verse 18. We're just going to do the first 4. He says right here, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, any common sharing in the Spirit, right, that's the word koinonia there, our deep fellowship and communion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. And we can just pause there for a second. He says that this is the flow of how it's constructed. If you notice, there's a bunch of if statements and then statements. If, then them. This is also part of the circle of giving and receiving. His exhortation to them to make his joy complete by being like-minded, by having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind, which actually has to do with having one purpose there. Being like-minded also does not mean all having like uniform thought. It actually relates to having a similar attitude or mindset. So he's saying have the same attitude or mindset, the same love, being one in spirit and with one purpose. That's part of the exhortation, and it's dependent on something else in a circle movement. And that's, are we receiving encouragement in Christ? Are we receiving any comfort from God's love? In our community, is there any common sharing of the Spirit? Do you feel any tenderness or compassion in your soul? If the answer to those questions is no, then the exhortation is not for you at this time. Then instead, the exhortation is for you is to lean into the ifs, lean into asking God, fill me with your love. Let me find ways of being in community that feel more life-giving. Help me to be that, create that, rest in that. Help me to rest and take steps away so that I can regain what is tender and soft in me that has become brittle and hard. Grow my compassion, God. We need that. if we're going to move and complete the circle into the then. Because in the circle, as opposed to the one line, we first receive from God. God pours God's care, God's comfort, God's love into us. As we spend time in our spiritual practices with each other, growing in our faith, whether it's like spending time in silence or in community, reading the word, praying, worshiping, advocating, all the ways that you connect with God. As you do that, God pours into you, and then guess what? You can give that out to others, and it becomes a circle. That would be number 2 in your notes if you're taking notes for the first one is line. The second one is the circle of sharing love. It's very mutual. The second shape of communal good news living is the circle of sharing love. When you cut into it, it's good news. I have to say that this room right here, I know only just a fraction of some of your stories, and I know that they are stories full of giving and receiving, and of receiving and giving. I know those of you listening online, those of you here, you have experienced God's care when you were going through hard times. Perhaps you came to a community and you were in the middle of a life crisis. Maybe you're going through a really difficult time with your family, with a spouse, with a roommate, in school, and you received God's comfort and care for you. Maybe you were here and you're expecting to be rejected because of something that happened or something you did, and you were received with empathy, and you received God's care through that. Some of you have gone through all sorts of breakups and divorces and deconstructing and reconstructing your faith. And you've been able to receive God's tenderness and mercy and care. There are so many movements of the circle that are here, even today. It's not a one-way street. But as God pours into us and we experience God's care for us and with each other, then we can be part of that circle of passing it on and receiving. Now you'll notice that this whole passage, none of this is a checklist about what to believe, is it? It's not even really like a checklist of what to do, but rather Paul is inviting us to join this circle, to receive and to give, and receive and to give, and have how we are together be good news. The passage right after this one that Pastor Gerald is going to be preaching on from next week, starting in verse 5, is going to offer us like another shape in the communal good news living. And so we're going to hear more about that next week. Because beyond the distortion of the one-way line and beyond even the beauty of the circle of sharing love, there is another shape that appears in this passage. Oh, yeah, see here we have the condition and the exhortation. You see how those are kind of linked up. That's from earlier before. Okay, I'll go ahead and blank line there. So the other shape that we see here in this passage, not the line, wonderful circle, there's another one, and that is the shape of Jesus's life. In Jesus's life, as we know, as we walk with Jesus in Lent, right, the period of 40 days, as we draw near to Jesus, as we remember how close he gets and how near he gets to the worst things that we can experience in life, and how he doesn't shy away from that, but he walks a downward path all the way to the cross. And as we walk with him in Lent, opening the door in new ways to be shaped by Jesus' life, we remember that Jesus' life was not just a one-direction line from heaven to us. He did descend in the incarnation. He was also held in love and care as he did so. He was received and affirmed by his Father before he did any ministry. He received plenty of flack from people around him, and he also received honor and love from his disciples, from all the women that supported his ministry financially, saw him for who he was. The shape of Jesus' life, yes, did move down, and it also moved out as he embraces the world in incarnation, moved out as his arms were spread wide on the cross. Jesus moved out as he became the outcast one, the scapegoat on the cross. And as Jesus moved out, he showed us that there's nothing between us and God to keep us apart from God's perspective, as God stretches wide to reconcile the whole cosmos. The shape of Jesus extending out in God's arms, embracing the world. And we see the shape of Jesus' life moving up up from the place of death itself, up to beauty and glory and honor in his Father's side in heaven, where all power and honor, glory is given him. As we see later on in the chapter, we know that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. So you see the shape of Jesus' life. We see down, out, we see up. We see a totally different shape that we are also invited to in our shared living. This week, I was reading an article online about Lydia, who was in this community of faith, one of the founding members of their church, and possibly even the pastor of the church. It's hard to know. But Paul was on a missionary journey in the area of Macedonia, which is the Roman colony, when he went to Philippi, and the first people to hear the good news are a group of women led by Lydia. And Lydia was a very wealthy woman. She had a household of her own, and she invited them into the household where she cared for their needs. And it was from there that Paul and Luke and the other folks who were traveling with them were able to share the good news and kind of make this a base of faith in the city here in Philippi, which the Philippian epistle is writing to. So it's all interconnected. So Lydia, a successful woman, and she became very wealthy from selling this purple dye. And back in those days, purple dye, or any dyes you got, had to come from nature right before they invented certain chemicals. So there's this one, purple dye was harder to get and more costly to get because you had to have huge amounts of this one natural material in order to get it. And so pretty much only folks who are like royalty or who are pretty privileged would wear purple. It was kind of a so Gucci thing to do. And as I was reading about Lydia and purple dye and the church that Paul's writing to here, a shape caught my eye. And I have a picture of it right here. Oh, that's a circle from before. Okay, moving past the circle, yes. And I think there's even a shape that's like a 3D shape. Can you find me the 3D shape? If you'll all close your ears, I'll tell Davey what it looks like. It looks like a snail. Oh, there we go. Okay, you see our snail shells. So this caught my eye as I was reading about Lydia. So if you're listening online, there's a group of the purple dye murex currently shown on our screen. It's kind of a spiny, spirally shell. So this caught my eye. I was like, that's an interesting shape. And I start reading about the purple dye murex snail. Can you tell by now that I do have some neurodiversity? Following all these threads along, reading all about the purple dye murex snail. And it grows its shell in a spiral. And this is where we get purple dye, right? You have to crush like 10,000 of these in order to get like 1 gram of purple dye. So that's a lot of these little snails, poor little guys. Now, the snail, in terms of how it works, the snail doesn't tear down or remodel earlier parts of their shell. Every stage of growth remains present while they get bigger. Because as the snail grows, it just increases its opening, and it carries the shape forward as it grows ever bigger. So it has a recognizable shape. It goes down, out, and up, down, out, and up, down, out, and up. And I thought, as I was looking at this little shell, this little spiral, I thought, that's the shape of Jesus' life. The shape of transforming love. Down, out, and up, down, out, and up. Not just a flat or a one-directional line, but 3D. If we wanted, we could call this spiral theology. You want to write a devotional with me? We can. We'll ask Max Lee if we can use his slides. We have Christ pouring himself out, and not into disappearance, in incarnation and solidarity. We have Christ stretching wide to receive the whole world in his death and his resurrection. We have Jesus rising. And each one of us, in our own ways, go through a similar arc of that. There's ways that life brings us low, and that following Christ can also sometimes bring us to a low place. There's places that we've been widened in God's love as we open doors, new doors to neighbors and friends and strangers, to new places in our soul. And as God's transforming love spirals through us, it lifts us up too. It lifts people up so we don't have to live in shame. We don't have to live in isolation or in pain that is not met with God's healing. It lifts us up, and we're able to lift others up with it. And through that, the shape of Messiah is seen. Is it good news? Yes. When you cut into it, it's gospel. So that brings us to number 3 in your notes if you're writing down. The first one is the distortion, the shape of communal good news living. It's not a great shape. That's the One Direction line. Then we have our circle, which is mutual love by sharing love. And then we have the spiral. Love flows in the shape of Jesus' life, which transforms. So we get ready to take communion. I just have a couple questions for us. And what does our shared life look like when it's good news? It's not going to be a one-way street, one person always giving, everyone else always receiving. It's not going to look like constant pressure or self-erasure. It will look more like a circle, mutual receiving, sharing, giving. And hopefully it is Christ-shaped. Hopefully it leads to us drawing the circle wider and wider, the shape of Jesus' life and love transforming us, growing us down, out, and up. So, friends, out of the 3 shapes we talked about, the line, the spiral, the circle, and the spiral, which one do you think you might be at? The line, the circle, or the spiral? Which one do you think we might be at together? As we move into communion together, I want to invite you into prayerful reflection. I have a couple more questions on the screen for you, for me, for us all together, the Alleluia, all of us, to bring to God. We have right here, is it easier for you to give or receive? When we looked at that passage with all the ifs and then the thens, is it easier for you to give or receive? Do you need to receive from God? Right? There's certain conditions that still need to be met. Are you in a place where you can share? What do you need? Where are you at? I invite you to keep reflecting on these as you go through the week. And then what does it mean for our koinonia, our sharing together? Right? This is how we are together. Our gospel citizenship witness. What does that need at Wellspring? What does how we are together, what needs are there? What might need to be changed or celebrated or grown or us made aware of? I have this piece of art for us just to meditate on as I close us in prayer. And it's by Scott the painter, and it's entitled Calling You. And I like it. It's kind of like a spiral. Bear with me here. Pretend it's a spiral moving up. I don't know. It's also a circle. But it reminded me how at the heart of it all is God's love and care for us and for the world, which moves us, transforms us from the inside out. I love the little birds here because they remind me of freedom. They also remind me of how each one of us has an inner pull, right? Each one of us has an inner pull, almost like a little honing instinct that some birds have. An inner pull towards God, that God has placed there. So I want to invite you to listen to that and ask God what the shape of you think our community life is and how God wants to meet us there. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that we can move beyond distortions into good pictures of what it looks like to be a community who is good news in how we are together. With all the heaviness each one of us are carrying today, throughout the week, or in our world, I ask that you invite us to turn our attention even towards our little group here and how we are together. Because we remember that it was those little groups that changed the world. Because of churches like Philippi, who supported Paul, helping him to still write and still minister in prison, we're able to see a more fuller picture of who you are, God, that has carried us thousands of years, has helped us correct ways of being in and out of the church that are not of you and that are not good news. Call us, O Spirit of God. Rest on us. Fill us with your mutual and kind love and transform us in who we are together. For your goodness and for the good news we pray. Amen.